All right, well, welcome everybody. I'm Mark Lichtman. I'm the chair of the U.S. Chess Ratings Committee. What I'm planning on doing is going over some prepared discussion points to let you guys know what the Ratings Committee has been up to, and also try to get your thoughts on some issues that I thought might be helpful. So I expect that people are going to wander in, but I think in the spirit of kind of proceeding, I'll just start sharing my slides now. Can everyone see these? Is that all right? Okay, and please feel free, like if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to interrupt. Again, this isn't meant to be purely a presentation. Getting feedback from you is exactly the point of this kind of a workshop. So there are 5 discussion points I wanted to bring up during today's meeting. It's not going to be very long. It's, the hope is to try to get your thoughts on some of these issues as I go through them. I want to first mention that, the Ratings Committee every year, or I should say most years, does this monitoring analysis to make sure that the chess rating system is essentially functioning and not deflating or inflating. And so I'll show you some results there. One of the things that I wanted to try to get feedback from some of you on is this notion of a rating uncertainty or variance measure, and I'll describe that in a little bit more detail once we get there. This is something that's been floating around for a few years, but it's been kind of in a slightly unclear situation right now, and want to try to get some ideas for directions forward. I just want to let people know, in case they're not aware, that U.S. Chess is about to embark on an architectural redesign. And as Carol just informed me at this a couple of minutes before we started, that the request for proposal is imminently going out. So it's in a situation where things are going to start happening. And so I wanted to just bring you up to speed on what the Ratings Committee involvement has been. There are 2 other issues that I wanted to also mention. One is there's been some initial discussion on whether to rate Fischer random chess. So I'll have a couple things to say about that. And then finally, something that's also on our radar is that FIDE is updating its rating system. It's making an adjustment in January, and then changing some of the rating formulas. And the impact that has on U.S. Chess is that we're going to need to at least incorporate a new conversion from FIDE ratings to U.S. ratings. And that's something that we don't need to do anything immediately, but in the coming year, that's something that we're going to need to do. Okay, so just moving through this. So I want to let people know, in case you're not familiar, the analysis that the Ratings Committee has been doing for years and years, and seems to be pretty effective, is that what we do is we identify a group of players that we consider to be stable. And when I say stable, what I essentially mean are players who are in a given year, we identify players that are 35 to 45 years old. So these are players who are not like improving quickly or not deteriorating in ability. They're relatively constant in ability. Also, they had to have played not only in the current year, but also in the previous 3 years. And in each of those years, they must have had established ratings. So they must have been established at the start of that 4-year period. So this table that you see over here is essentially by year a summary of that kind of a group that's formed. And just again, to be very specific, let me just jump right down to the last row on this table, just so you know what this means. So in the year 2022, which meaning like in the, based on the December rating supplement, what we ended up finding is that there were a total of 644 players that were established in the current year and in the previous 3 years, and who were between 35 and 45 years old. And they played every single one of those 4 years at some point. Of those 644 stable players, their average rating was 1825. And now you can go back and look at what that same analysis was in each of the prior years. when we did that analysis. In fact, we went back as far as 1996. You'll notice that these average ratings for this group tend to oscillate a little bit. They fluctuate. What we're trying to do in our kind of monitoring analysis is try to make adjustments to the rating system so that we're basically getting the equivalent of a mean rating of what we had in 1997. So if we start seeing this rating, this average rating, start to inch up a little bit, that's some indication that ratings are inflating. And so then we want to put some pressure on the system so that the average rating will start to go down a little bit. So you can see that the rating system was deflating over the years, especially in the early 2000s, as the average rating was now dropping down to the 1700s. And then it started climbing again in the 2010s. And then we needed to put a little bit of pressure on making the ratings go down again. And so what we're seeing, though, in this current year is that relative to 2019, this average rating dropped a bit. And there's also, in addition to just simply this evidence of a little bit of a drop in this average rating for this stable group, the other issue is that people haven't been playing over the board chess for the last couple of years during the pandemic. Meanwhile, they're probably getting better. At least the scholastic players are getting better. And so their ratings were remaining constant, but their abilities were getting better. And that's a deflationary force. What we need to do to combat that deflation is to play around with this bonus point threshold, specifically to drop the bonus point threshold to make it easier to get bonus points. And that's going to result in ratings increase. And so that was our recommendation. We had a 6-to-1 vote on the ratings committee to lower the bonus point threshold. One of our committee members felt that this drop wasn't so pronounced to be of concern, but all the other members on the committee felt that beyond just seeing these numbers, the fact that people were probably, especially scholastic players, were getting better over the pandemic without having over-the-board games to actually reflect that, we better be proactive and actually cause ratings to increase a little bit by lowering the bonus point threshold. So I don't know where that stands. Actually, Mike, since you're on, did you get any result from your discussions with the board about whether that's been approved or not?
State again.
Well, so we made this recommendation to the executive board back a couple months ago to lower the bonus point threshold.
The board feels that there's no need for us to be involved with this.
Okay, so
we don't need to vote. We don't need to vote on it. Y'all do what you're chartered to do by the board.
Okay, so we'll just work with the office.
Right.
Could you hear me? Somehow I was muted.
Yeah, it was me. I did that by mistake. I hit the wrong button.
Okay. In any case, all right, good. So we'll just work with the office on making sure that this happens. Great. Along with this, I just wanted to just show a couple figures to show what the changes look like over time. There are 3 figures that I ended up producing for you. One is actually looking at players who are in between 30 and 40 years old. So this is a slightly younger group, but you can kind of see what's happening. This curve in the middle is showing year by year what essentially the average rating is for this stable group. So this is essentially the average. It's really the median, but it's like essentially the average. And it dropped over time and started increasing a little bit, and it's starting to drop a little bit, and that's where we have a little bit of a concern. This dotted line, by the way, is the rating at in the year 1997 that we're trying to get our get the ratings to mimic. These other curves, by the way, are different parts of the distribution. So this is the upper 5 percentile of the distribution. The bottom curve is the lower percentile of the distribution, the lower 5 percentile of the distribution. And then these 2 other curves that are surrounding the one in the middle, the one that is probably the most important one, these 2 outside of it are the quartiles. These are the 75 percentile and the 25 percentile. And you can see that the shapes of these curves, they all kind of go down a little bit in the years going from roughly late 90s to around 2008, and then they start increasing a little bit, and now they're, we're trying to make them come back down again. It's the same story for the 35 to 45-year-olds, which is what this graph is showing. Basically the same kind of picture. And then for the 40 to 50-year-olds, just wanted to throw that on just so you could see that the pattern doesn't seem to change very much depending on which age groups you're focusing on. That's all I wanted to say about this this particular monitoring analysis. Are there any questions about what we've done and what the rationale is for this this recommendation before I continue?
Yeah, I presume that the analysis, like when you talk about players that are stable, you've discounted players that are at their floor. Who's
Correct.
rating? Yeah, okay, yeah.
That's right.
And Mark, when I look at this, I mean, it seems pretty flat.
Yeah, I mean, it's flat, but like these changes are like about 100 points. So like going from, if you could see my cursor, going from this point to this point, that's about 100 rating points.
Gotcha.
And so, so that it's a little more appreciable maybe than just, seems by eye. So
I know it's probably arbitrary, but why is why is that 1997 or 96, whatever it was, why is that sacrosanct as your?
It's not. We just picked a date and we've stuck with it, and we've been using that as our standard for years and years.
Okay.
There's no particular magic rationale for that particular year.
Okay.
Anything else at this point?
And y'all have never looked at, this is a really wild question. Y'all have never really looked at any kind of a conversion formula between regular over the board and online and online regular, or vice versa. Is that correct?
We haven't done any particular analysis that looks at a correspondence between the two at this point. No.
Yeah. And the only reason I ask is a lot of directors are in the habit of, when a player enters an online regular tournament, if they don't have a rating, I just use their over the board regular rating.
Right. Well, the rating system right now has very specific rules for what are going to be the initial ratings for somebody who's unrated in one of the systems, how that actually factors in the other ratings from the other systems that US just runs. So in fact, the formula got to be a little more complicated a couple of years ago, where it's actually a weighted average of your other ratings.
Because I know that especially in scholastics, one of the common questions we get from parents and from players is they'll look at their over the board rating, and it'll say like 1247, provisional 14, and the parent will say, how can it be 14? He's only played in 4 games. Why is it 14? There's a lot of that. It's very common.
I didn't even realize that's how it's.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it should just.
And we've asked Mike Nolan about it, and he kind of like, I don't know.
That might be a bug, because I think it's supposed to be the number of games it's based on. It shouldn't be any like complicated formula. So
we were thinking was maybe it's somehow it's counting and somehow giving some weighted average to the online games, and because these are players that have online ratings.
I was never involved in any discussion, or at least I'm not aware of any discussion that
okay. So
I'll
see if I can
change the based on number.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find some of those and send you some examples. But I see them pretty frequently during the spring scholastic season when I'm doing the ratings analysis for the tournaments. So
the person that should be involved in that discussion, I'm pretty sure, should be Mike Nolan, because he would have implemented it. So we should find out precisely what he actually implemented.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. All right. The other related analysis that we also do every year is to perform a rating floor analysis. And just to set the stage for this, suppose that there were no rating floors and you were to ask the question, what fraction of players, and let's keep this to players that are above 1200 and that are established, what fraction of players would have a rating that has 00 as their last 2 digits of the rating? So like what fraction of players would have a rating of 1200, 1300, 1400, 1500? Well, the answer to that question is that since there are 100 numbers between 00 and 99, you would expect 1% of all players, just from playing in tournaments, to have a final set of 2 digits of 00. So the analysis that we end up performing is to actually calculate what percentage of players, since we don't know, we don't actually immediately have the information of the fraction of players that are on their floor. What we can do is we can infer the fraction of players that are on their floor by seeing what is the excess beyond 1% of players that have a final 2 digits of 00. So in other words, like if we end up seeing that, 4% of players have ratings that end in 00, and we would just expect by chance only 1% of them to be ending in 00, that must mean that there are 3% of players that are at the rating floor. That's
so that percentage that you mentioned, 4%, that includes players who are sitting on their rating floor.
Correct, because all the information that we have is just simply what the rating is. So we have just their rating. We know by chance that a rating will just drop on a 00 with 1%, 1% of the time. And so the amount beyond that is going to be that excess amount is the percent that's on the rating floor. So let me show
Mark, I can tell you, being
Yeah.
here in Florida, the only group that I know of that skews your data, they're in the villages.
you. Okay.
It's a lot of guys in the villages. Everyone's is 1500, 1400, 18.
Yeah, that very well may be. I mean, if they're all on their rating floor.
Yeah.
Well, so I was using the numbers like this number of 4%. I was actually being very kind, as you're about to see, because this is what it looks like over time, going back to now 1992. So what I did is the horizontal axis here is the year, the year of the December supplement, and then the heights of these curves are the percent of established players, and I'm actually only looking at established players between 1400 and 2199. I'm going to show you the same thing for 1200 to 1399, which was a floor that was implemented more recently, but this one has been around a little longer. The heights of these curves are the percent of players with a 00 rating. And I drew in at 1% a horizontal line because that would be the place where you would just naturally expect players to have a 00 rating. And so you could see over time, especially going back to like 1996, a little over 12% of all players had ratings that ended in 00. And this was a time where there was enormous rating deflation. Basically, people's ratings would just drop on their floor. I think there was also the floor formula was a little stricter. I think it was like 100-point floor, not a 200-point floor like we have right now. So we made the change in 1997. In any case, I want to fast forward to where we are right now. You can see that over time, what's happening is that the percentage of players that are on their floor can be inferred to be increasing over time, because right now we have roughly 8% of players who have ratings between 1400 and 2199 have a rating of 00, which means that roughly 7% of the players are at their floor. And so that's of some concern because these players, the rating system isn't really accommodating. It's not accommodating players to have an accurate rating if they're just sitting on their floor. It probably means that they're a little bit worse. I understand that this is a compromise in the system so that players are not going to be so discouraged and leave playing chess. But I wanted to at least illustrate to you that this is a real phenomenon, that they're really getting to be.
I guess the part of this I don't understand is why isn't there a second curve showing that's showing the percentage of players that have just been sitting on their rating floor?
Well, so I don't have that information. All I know is just basically whether a player has a rating that ends in 00 or not. So there would need to be an extra step. And I mean, maybe there's going to be a way to make this happen going forward. I mean, we know what players are on their rating floor. Like if I ended up contacting one of the ratings managers on staff to say, just tell me what fraction of players on the rating floor, I wouldn't have to do this analysis. So I could actually just I suppose.
Because I think it depends upon how you define quote on the rating floor. To me, on the rating floor means they're playing in tournaments and their ratings aren't going up anymore, as opposed to I'm passing through 1600 and at that data pool I happen to be at 1600.
Well, right, but you would expect 1% of players to be at that point. And so
Right.
everything you're seeing that's above that are players that must be at their floor by the end of the year. I mean,
So what's
this
the
does include players that have gone up a little bit during the year and went back down to the rating floor.
yeah, so what's the significance of this in terms of how it may or may not impact our rating formula?
Well, it's distorting
Yes.
the ratings.
It's inflating the rating is what it's doing.
It's inflating the ratings because, right, people at the rating floor actually have a higher rating than their ability. So they're actually the games that they're playing against opponents, the opponents are actually going to have on average higher ratings because of their results against these players. So it has an inflationary tendency.
Because FIDE doesn't use rating floors at all.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is more just to, like, to be aware that we're in a situation where there's this inflationary. It's inflationary in the wrong way. Like this is inflationary because the players on the floors are misrated, and you're seeing results against these misrated players. So these extra inflated points are going to players that shouldn't be getting them in the first place. So it's a distortion of ratings. The ratings then become less predictable. And if this just continues, then we're going to have a problem. We might have to take more drastic measures, or at least recommend taking more drastic measures. So that's the problem.
Mm-hmm.
So the kind of situation that we have for players that are between 1,200 and 1,399 is not as severe. This is now up to 5% if you match it on the vertical axis. And this is only because the rating floors dropped to 1,200 a little bit more recently than they were set to 1,400. So again, it's still climbing up. So again, this is the sort of thing that we're going to continue to be monitoring. So I just wanted to raise this issue. This is something that we do every year as well. Any questions? Okay, good. Let me go on to the next point, which is ratings uncertainty and rating confidence. So the idea here, this is something that I'll tell a bit about the history of this, but the key idea is that we're exploring this idea that instead of just players having just a rating, which of course is a measure of your ability, we also want to have a measure of the variance of a rating. And I'm going to be more specific about what I mean by that in a slide or two. And so the hope is that by having some kind of measure of variability or confidence or uncertainty, then TDs can decide whether, for example, it's unfair to place players that have a very uncertain rating in lower rated sections, because if it's so uncertain, then that gives them that much more of an advantage. I think that's the thinking behind having this uncertainty measure. So it's not. So to be clear, what we're talking about is not anything that would be built into the rating formulas. It wouldn't affect how ratings are calculated. It would only be on top of the rating system, using the existing ratings and coming up with a way of measuring how variable or uncertain ratings are. So just a little bit of history. So back in the mid-90s, I came up with a system from first principles using probability modeling to come up with a rating system that introduced this notion of rating uncertainty. And it very specifically meant that if you have a rating and this uncertainty measure, the uncertainty measure would essentially tell you how reliable that rating was. And so this is a system that's been implemented, it's in the public domain. It's been implemented in various chess organizations, quite a few online chess, and also plenty of online gaming outside of chess. That being said, US Chess started expressing an interest in this type of variance measure back in 2016. I did end up working with a student, and we proposed a measure that kind of got sidetracked a little bit. One of the more recent ratings chairs then started working on a slightly different approach. And so it's kind of stagnated because it's become a little unclear what exactly the goal is. And so I want to, with this group here, I wanted to actually get a little bit of feedback on the direction we should go.
Yeah,
because-
the goal is to provide a shoot, I can't think of the right word, but we want as a tournament director, I'm authorized under Rule 21 to give a player a different rating if I think that player's playing strength, is much higher than what it is.
Okay.
And I don't normally do that, but what variance would be, so for example, let's say I have a player who comes in with 1880 and the positive variance is plus 25, but the negative variance is 130. And that player's trying to play in a certain class in my tournament. I can use that rating variance as an aid to determine whether or not I think that player should be playing in the section that, he or she is trying to play in and trying to enter into.
So Mike, let me actually explain the two notions, and it sounds like you're describing more of the second type, but I want to make super clear what the problem is and what the two kinds of variances are, and then if you could let me know if you agree that it's the second type, then
it is.
Proceed that way. Okay, so the two kinds of, just so everybody else understands on this call, the two kinds of variances that you could implement in this kind of system. The first one is a measure of how reliable a rating is. And so what I mean by that is, like, suppose you've only played a couple games in US chess, in which case, like, you'd have a provisional rating. It's not a very trustworthy measure, in which case it's uncertain. And so that's a particular way of having there's a way to quantify that level of uncertainty. Could also be a rating where, it's been an established rating, but you haven't played in years, in which case, again, your rating is probably uncertain.
Yeah, I think it would also be a measure of, like, if somebody's rating is increasing rapidly, then the unreliability of the rating may be there, as opposed to inconsistency where it's bouncing up and down,
Okay, so yeah, so I think what you're going to end up describing is the second one. So the second one basically is more of how consistent you are in your performances. So that's more of a measure of, like, if a player, I mean, Mike, what you just said of, like, if a player is improving quickly, and so they're, like, outperforming the rating quite a bit, then that would be a measure of inconsistency. There might be players also who just are very erratic. They tend to defeat higher rated players or lose to lower rated players. So the range of their abilities is actually quite dispersed. And that's different from this first measure, which is basically saying how reliable is the rating based on the information that's in the game outcomes that form the rating. So if I understand, Mike, what you're saying is that the preference would be, how much are players' performances, changing and varying time. Okay.
So it's not the kind of thing where, let's say you get an entry from a player who's rated 1550, and the tournament director is wanting to put him in the next higher section, because the only kind of data that I would use to do that would be stuff like, look, in the last tournament you played in, you won that class with a 7-0 record. So you're not going to play in that class in my tournament. You know what I mean? That's the way I look at it right now.
Mike, I hear you, but the operationalization of these things in a consistent way scares the daylights out of me.
Doesn't scare me as a TD. So
no, but, like, boys, like, you're one of our highest and most competent directors, right? And I think we probably have to provide some guidance.
Yeah, when we talked about this before, that was what we talked about as the board level, was the guidance for implementation that would go out to tournament directors so they know how to correctly employ this data as opposed to abusing it, because, like, it might be the kind of thing where I say do one thing and then Dave Hayter says do something completely different. And that's what you want to try to avoid. You don't want to introduce additional inconsistency into the problem because of the way tournament directors are implementing the process.
Exactly my point.
All right, Mike, that was very helpful. So I completely understand exactly what the goal is here, and so I can move this forward.
I would,
because it's basically saying, like, if you examine an individual's players like, you can think of it as like performance rating over time, or like performance ratings in like some recent window of time,
Yeah.
and describe how much variation there is in their performance, then that's going to be some indication of.
Yeah, because I'm much more reluctant to want to use a system like this in scholastic events, because the majority of those players are on the way up,
Right.
and so it's not, it wouldn't be good to say, well, this kid's rated 1400, but he can't play in the under 1500 section. That would just drive coaches and everybody else nuts. Where I see it is in bigger tournaments where you got a lot of money involved and you have class prizes, and then you have the person trying to sandbag their rating and that sort of stuff, and you can and this can help identify those people.
Well, I mean, the sort of the fraudulent aspect of it is a different problem. I mean, so that's also solved by, for example, correlating, weak performances with like low, low money events, and then
Right.
good performances high.
Right,
I mean,
correct.
that's something that can be implemented separately if that's, if that's a concern. But regardless, I mean, I think the idea of having, I understand that the notion of basically checking out how variable an individual's performance is over time, which is not this uncertainty measure, which is what the Glico system does. It's this inconsistency measure, which is,
Mhm.
it's clear what needs to be done. So I'll work with the committee in moving this forward.
Okay.
Great. All right, so the last couple items are fairly quick. It's more informational. So the first item is just to make you aware that the US chess rating system architecture is going to be undergoing a redesign to modernize it. There's this is going out to bid very shortly. It's a fairly major redesign, and the particular items that have been part of the request for a proposal are things like creating a comprehensive system architecture, rebuilding the ratings engine, rebuilding the current player game database and website, including the member services area, and then being able to migrate the existing system to the new system. The committee was involved to some degree in this this endeavor. Particularly, the committee members were asked to comment on the RFP, and I agreed to serve as an advisor for the redevelopment. I also made some fairly in-depth comments on and edits on the RFP. I have on the slide that the timing of the project is unknown, but that's before I talked to Carol for minutes before the meeting tonight. But so apparently the RFP is going out very shortly. Although I don't know what sort of timeline the redesign has. I don't know if you want to say anything, Carol.
I can speak to that. So I think vendor selection is going to be in the October-November timeframe, with an expected delivery by December of next year. So
Great.
So the question, Mark, is will the rating variance discussion potentially have an impact on the data structure, that's in this database, so that we have to make sure that gets accounted for?
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of things that need to be part of the rating redesign, including the ability to make perhaps substantial changes in the future to the rating system.
Yeah, because I'm just mainly thinking about the architecture of the database itself, that you have data fields if you need to have data fields for certain things.
Yeah, well,
if we're planning on, for example, when a player goes to MSA in the future, it might show some form of variance that's with that player's rating, plus or minus 35 or whatever,
Right. I mean, there are all kinds of things. Like, I mean, we're talking about new rating systems to be added, so players need to see their new ratings as well. And so this would be yet another statistic that they would end up seeing. So presumably there should be like nearly unlimited number of fields that would be attached to each individual player's record, including a rating variance. But I mean, there are a lot of other different calculations that one could do, that would be supplemented with the MSA. Behind the scenes, it's not using any extra information like this. This
Right.
variance calculation is just simply using,
Right, just doing
existing
math.
ratings and game outcomes and tournament results. So nothing else needs to be added there. It's just simply going to be, moving, just making sure that we have the ability to create extra fields that are part of the player record.
Yeah, I think as you look at the variance thing too, you'll need to think through whether this variance should change after every time a player plays in a tournament, or you just change it monthly as opposed as at the time when the rating supplements are created.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, that sort of thing seems more like, something that staff should decide, because, from our point of view, it's a calculation. So like, we can do the calculation regularly, and then whenever you want to, report it to players, that's not a calculation decision. That's just simply how. the
Well,
information
but it
flows.
does get at what tournament directors tend to use when they're looking at players' ratings in tournaments is what's in the rating supplement. And
Okay,
we
so they're
only
not
look,
looking at the ratings online. So I thought they're
no,
using
we
rating.
in general, like for example, if Caleb's going to play in one of my tournaments and his rating in the supplement is 1400, and he played in 2 more tournaments since then, and his rating went up to 1435, I'm still using the 1400 rating supplement rating, because the statistical,
Sure.
it
So
just
so
isn't
there,
affected enough with 35
right.
point ratings.
So we can easily we could do it both ways. I mean, in the supplement, you could actually print out what the variance measure is, and it could be, updated online every time event is rated.
And I don't see,
same way ratings are computed.
yeah, and I really don't see, at least not at this point, I wouldn't see a need to be calculating variance like for online tournaments. Now it's just a formula. You just throw the different set of numbers in and it spits out the data. So it's not a big deal.
Sure.
But I don't see much relevance of it, perhaps even for Blitz. But it's primarily in the online, in the over the board tournaments is where, tournament directors are looking for some sort of a tool to.
Right,
help
over the
us.
board, regular, like slow games.
Right.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. I mean, we could use that as our sandbox, and then we can have a discussion later whether it makes sense to incorporate it into the other systems. Sure.
Yeah, so
Okay.
what I would recommend in terms of timing is y'all work on that so that next year this time, maybe like in March or so, you've kind of got a recommendation that can come to the executive board, and we kind of chew on it and take a look at it, and give it to different tournament directors to take a look at, get some feedback on it, and then that way we can give feedback a couple months before the US Open, in case y'all want to just take that feedback, because the key is going to be that less the math and more the implementation. And so y'all will need to work with the tournament director certification committee and perhaps even the rules committee to figure that out, because that's where a lot of the national tournament directors all reside, is in those 2 committees.
Okay. I think that timeline sounds entirely reasonable. And then I guess ideally, I guess from what Carol was saying, then it would be ready to implement in the the question is like whether it's going to be something that would be implemented in the new system, or if it made sense to actually include it in the current system, because it sounds like the timing is such that it probably wouldn't actually be ready to implement until like late next year anyway. So I guess we can figure that out. 2 other small issues. First, there's some startup discussion about possibly constructing a rating system. Mike brought this to my attention about a month ago, that there's some affiliates want to hold official random chess events, and it would be nice to have a rating system. So I've initiated a conversation with the ratings committee about this. We actually have the Larry Kaufman is I guess the reigning chess 960 champion. At least that's what he.
Yeah, I know in our national events, the ability to be able to do this, like in the US Open, And the bug house in our national scholastic events is, it's fewer and fewer people seem to be playing in that. So maybe we try some chess 960 instead in one of the, like maybe in the December tournament next, not maybe this year, but the next year.
Yeah.
Maybe we try chess 960 at the grade nationals, a year and a half from now,
Right.
just to see how it works.
Right. And I could tell you just from the quick feedback from the committee, people were basically in agreement that it would probably just be another carbon copy of one of the existing rating systems. And then the only real question would be how to initialize ratings.
Yeah, exactly.
I would just like to note on that, if we're going to add chess 960, a rating system for that, which I think we definitely should do, the delegates will need to add something to the rule book about providing like provisions for, like, the FIDE rules have something in there about, so we would need something equivalent to that in the US chess rules, I would think.
Yeah, but the delegates don't add it. The rules committee writes it, and then the delegates vote on it. So
Exactly.
it's not like a bunch of delegates go sit down and write the rules. It's the rules committee writes the rules, and then the delegates vote.
Right, yeah.
That's why I'm saying this is a
Yeah.
year off, because the rules committee would have to, work with it between now and next year's delegates meeting. Now, the executive board has the authority, just like we did with online. We can invoke a system for a period of time, just like we did for online, and then the delegates voted on it at the meeting. But we did that largely just because of the situation we were in the world, and we needed to be playing online chess, and we had no rules. So we said, we put this committee together of NTDs, and we wrote the online rules, and we implemented them like in March or thereabouts, or April, well before the delegates meeting. It's just so simply directors would have something to work with as they ran online tournaments. But I don't think we're in that kind of a situation right now, because a TD can run a chess 960 tournament at their event. There's nothing stops them from doing that. It's just, there's no rating that comes from it. It's an unrated activity. It's just a fun event like Bug House is, So, because people have asked about Bug House ratings, and I'm not interested in going there, because you play on different teams, and it's crazy.
Yeah, well, I mean, just in case it's relevant, we actually, the theory is there to actually implement a system. It would be a little different from what we currently have, but there actually is a way to get individual player ratings on Bug House teams. So just, to keep on your radar. So that would be possible.
But
And-
one thing I should mention, if
Larry.
if you're talking about chess 960, whether it's rules for having it or rules for rating it, but one decision that someone will have to make is whether that includes subsets of chess 960. For example, there was a tournament held a couple of months ago, which I wrote up for Chess Life, which was called Chess 18, which is a subset of 960. It's the 18 positions that have the kings and rooks and normal squares, so that you don't need the special castling rules. So the question is whether tournaments that use some portion of the 960 positions could be rated as chess 960.
Yeah, I think we would use as a starting point the FIDE rules, and just kind of go from there, and and see what works.
Well, how does that address the question?
I don't know. I don't know anything about FIDE's rules for chess 960. I'm just saying we would use that as a starting point.
Okay.
No, Larry, I
Yeah.
I understand the issue. I think it's important because chess 18 is a lot more like regular chess than chess 960. So in fact, we may even want to consider something where the ratings are actually a little bit more connected than in the systems that we have right now. In other words, a chess 18 change in rating might actually affect a chess 960 rating, but maybe not in large magnitudes. So that might be a discussion that we have within our group. But yeah, it's an important point. I mean, and I don't know how often if like these particular subsets of chess 960 are going to be so common that they'll need to be rated. So like, I mean, I can imagine that just.
I mean, it's like, because I think if you create a rating system, more people will play it, because the argument right now is like, nobody's playing this. Why do we need a rating system? I think it's sort of like, let's build a house and let's see who comes to it, you know, and then see how it goes.
Okay, in any case, yeah, these are discussions, and Larry actually started this discussion on the, among the committee anyway, so it's on our, it's on our plate. All right, the last thing I wanted to mention is that Mike Nolan pointed out to me very recently, I wasn't aware that FIDE is making some changes to their rating system. They're doing a fairly major one-time change, a compression change to their ratings, essentially taking low-rated players and bringing them up by 400 points, and then not so much the higher-rated players. And then there's going to be some calculation changes as well. Well, at least that's the proposal. I think they're waiting for some public input.
So there's a call for public input.
Right.
And that I think that the ratings committee should put together an official US chess position that Brian Yang can send to FIDE. Okay. So y'all, I don't know when the deadline is for
Do we
public.
really care? I mean, what's in it for us? What do we care?
Well, no, but that could be our position, is that do what you need to do. That's okay.
I see.
You know, but I think as a national federation, if they're asking for public input, we should give them feedback as a federation. I mean,
Okay.
a lot of other people who are statisticians and physicists that have PhDs that play with the numbers a lot, they're going to provide input on their own anyway, and that's okay. That's why they're looking for public input. But I think, we as a federation need to think about it. And, I would task the ratings committee to put together, a short recommendation that could be sent to FIDE through Brian Yang.
Sure.
But
So
I don't know.
could just-
I don't know when this deadline is for public input.
I'll take a look. I have all the links to all this stuff. I could tell you just immediately, my gut reaction on all this is just simply, whatever they decide to do, we'll be able to adjust. We use the FIDE ratings for these very specific purposes in the context of US chess. And whatever they do, we're going to need to update our conversion formulas.
Yeah, because I know right now I see inconsistent application by directors. Like I know for the Las Vegas tournament, they use one formula. I'll see other directors who just go to the rule book and they'll pull one of those formulas out. And like I go straight to the ratings formula paper and I use that formula.
Yeah.
So it varies, by TDs, and you can get ratings that vary by 100 points by using those different formulas.
Right. Well, so maybe staff needs to be a little bit clearer communicating to TDs where they should pull it from, so there's more consistency. I mean, from my point of view, whatever's in the rating specs is what should probably be used.
Right. Exactly. That's what I use. But I know when I was doing ratings reviews for Al Losoff for the Las Vegas, he uses a different formula, and it's not in the rule book. It's not. I don't know where he gets it from, but that's what he uses.
Well, it's changed a bunch of times over the years. Maybe he's just using some obsolete.
And he publicizes what formula he's using, so it's not like a player doesn't know.
Okay.
So it's no issue or anything, but it's just from a player's perspective, if one director interprets my 1880 FIDE rating one way, why is another director interpreting it a different way?
Yeah, no, I mean, there should certainly be consistency, and
heck, Mark, I don't know why in our MSA for players that have what I would call quote established FIDE ratings, like more than 25 games, like we use as an internal rule, that we don't just show a converted FIDE rating along with their real FIDE rating, and the converted FIDE rating shows the. Let me back up. For players that don't have a FIDE rating at all, you would have a conversion formula in case they're gonna need it. But I'm looking for something that simplifies what a director is going to use and look at. And if it needs to be a data field in somebody's MSA record, we can put their real FIDE rating in there. And because where we need it is when a player has a FIDE rating and they have no US chess rating.
Well, the situation that I'm aware of it's used is that when you have US players that are playing in FIDE tournaments that are not USCF rated,
Yes, exactly.
You basically need to use the opponent, the FIDE opponent who has no USCF rating, use that to update their USCF rating.
Right.
So it's like, there's no field that you need to do any conversion of, because it's always going to be the FIDE international opponents that you're doing the conversion for.
Well, for example, in the National Scholastics, we frequently get players from Puerto Rico or Canada or from Europe, like Ukraine. We've had several in the past year or two where they have no US chess rating or their rating has only got like 3 games, 5 games in it or
Sure
something.
thing, for initializing ratings, for initializing US.
Well,
ratings.
it's more for determining section eligibility to participate in US chess national scholastic events. So you'll
Okay.
have a player with an 1880 FIDE rating, and we convert it, it comes up to like 1950 US chess or thereabouts. And so then we say, well, yeah, you can't play in the under 1900 section,
Okay.
in the high school tournament. That's what I'm getting at.
I see. Okay, so it's just a matter of really, once we establish what the conversion is, it's being able to communicate.
Yeah, and so for a player who's got for a player who has what I would call an active FIDE rating, in other words, there's games that have been occurring in the past 2 or 3 years in their FIDE profile. There would be no need to apply a conversion factor to them unless you look at their rating variance, and their rating variance is showing that that kid's on a rocket ship going up, and say, well, that 1250 FIDE rating is not accurate anymore. There's no way it's accurate because its US chess rating is 1650. But that's sort of this. When I do the data analysis for the National Scholastics, my algorithms just basically will flag players whose converted FIDE rating converts to higher than their US chess over the board rating. And then we'll do a manual review and, and look at them, get the human in the loop to look at it and say, well, yeah, but he's only got 30 FIDE games and he's got 300 US chess games. So,
This would be a good point to mention something. I came across a study recently that showed that there's a very substantial disparity between FIDE ratings of Americans versus FIDE ratings of players in the world in general. In other words, for example, a 1600 American FIDE rating doesn't have the same meaning as a 1600 random person in the world rating.
yeah, I think it's a regional effect.
Yeah, and it goes both ways. It turns out that according to this study, at least at the high level, the Americans are underrated, and at the low level, the Americans are overrated.
Because I know when we look at the Northwest players from the Northwest, their ratings are in general inflated, and it's a regional effect. Their Northwest ratings are in general pretty inflated compared to their US chess ratings. So
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
pretty tough.
Well,
That's pretty-
anyway, my point is that if we're going to, if we have to address conversion of FIDE to US ratings, we might have to make some kind of distinction between whether we're talking about American FIDE ratings or foreigners' FIDE ratings.
yeah, so I think what you're suggesting is filter out the US ratings when you develop the conversion formula. Is that what you're suggesting?
I don't know how in the world we would end up getting.
Yeah,
it.
it would be difficult. It's a challenge. It's not an easy thing to do, but we could
It's
have
really
two
easy.
different
Just
formulas.
everything it
and-
says USA, you just don't count it.
Yeah, but then where does the conversion come from?
Well, the conversion comes from using the European ratings.
Yeah, but the point.
But European
ratings would
players that
be-
have US chess ratings, you would end up using them as your baseline.
I see. See, okay, all right. So you're saying.
Yeah, I
just
mean,
like-
it's weird.
Because, yeah, I was gonna say, because the process that we've always done is we just simply identify all.
Yeah.
All players that have both. FIDE
Everybody who's
and
got a
ratings.
FIDE
And you're
rating
saying,
is a US
take a
chess
look at a
rating.
subset of just the ones that are European.
Right. That's the same thing I do with the
there enough
Northwest. I'll
players?
take all the,
Are
when I
there
look at
enough
the
players to do
Northwest
that
every year, I do
analysis?
exactly the same thing.
How many players are there that are European residents that have?
Yeah.
US ratings and FIDE ratings? Are there a
Right.
lot?
Mhm.
There are a lot.
Yeah. But
Okay.
but most of them are at the higher levels is the problem. They're like above 2000 and that sort of thing.
Right, right,
So-
right. So the weaker players are probably not gonna have
Yeah.
US ratings, yeah, okay. Well, I mean, okay, so we could play games where we just like look at what the conversion is for the European players and then see how that actually, see
Right.
whether this this alleged relationship that Larry's talking about actually holds. So yes, we
Right.
can investigate this. Okay. All right, and that's all I had on my plate, and we're 3 minutes away from 9 o'clock, so the timing is pretty good. There any other comments or issues anybody wanted to bring up in the last few minutes?
Yeah, I think we, in the scholastic community, we still use the Northwest ratings to make sure that we put players in proper sections when they come and play in national scholastics. The good thing is more and more Northwest players are playing in US chess rated tournaments, but there's not, I mean, you'll get players that have between 200 and 400 Northwest games, and they'll only have like 20 or 30 US chess games. So that's, again, the human in the loop kind of thing where we look at that, you know, and we use, you know, an arbitrary that, okay, if you don't have 25 games and your Northwest rating is not established, so we kind of apply the same rule and we pull a rating supplement at the same, you know, by snapshotting all the Northwest ratings at the same time that the US chess rating supplement gets created. And we do the same for the FIDE rating, you know, FIDE supplement, so that when we do the analysis of ratings, we're looking at everybody's ratings basically at the same, you know, same point in time. But at some point, I want to talk to the ratings committee about the process that we go through to develop the ratings conversion formula for Northwest to make sure that, you know, you all as statisticians think that there's, yeah, that's logical, it makes sense, and, you know, or, you know, you're missing something that's critical and you need to fix it, and here's how you need to fix it. So, but I can do all that analysis and schedule a, you know, a call or something like this with you guys and give you a couple of weeks to look at what I put together, and then we can talk about it. So
Sure, this sounds good. Yeah, the issue, I think when the Northwest ratings first came online, that was something that we were thinking about, but like that hasn't surfaced in a long time at this
and
point.
they're changing their formula. They used to use a floor of 100, no 400, but they're dropping it to 100, and they just started that in January. So that's going to affect all their ratings, you know. So
Right, yeah, in fact, it might even, depending on how
it's gonna mess
might
things
cause
up for
some
about 3 or
confusion.
4 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
So okay. Well, I appreciate the presentation for everyone tonight.
Great, well, thanks everybody for showing up. I will see you at some point. All right, thanks again.
Thanks, Mark.
Yep.
Thanks,
Night,
guys.
everyone.
Thanks
Thanks,
everybody
Mark.
attending.
Thanks, Mark.
Um,
Bye-bye.